All right, so have you guys heard of this little company called Steam? It's a little like game launcher software, probably not worth a whole lot of money or anything like that, but they actually make a hardware survey and it comes out every month. So I started thinking, what if we actually took the hardware survey and made a PC based off of the most common configuration that was listed in the hardware survey? So I thought it would be fun to put that PC together, show it off. Let's see how it does in some games and see what the most common configuration should give us the most common FPS. So let's give it a shot. All right, so for starting off, we're going to start with the platform. So the most common processor actually still, which was much to my surprise, is Intel. And the most common configuration tells us that the most common physical cores for a CPU are 6, which not really that far off of my own recommendations for a gaming PC. So a 6-core CPU that's from Intel, that leaves us a whole lot of options to actually go through. But taking a look at the actual speed, the base speed is a 2.6 gigahertz processor. And immediately I thought that's probably a Xeon. And God, I don't want to make a Xeon build right now. So I did a little more digging and I thought, you know what? That actually is going to work out. And so I actually picked up this 11th gen 11400F. One, because it is 6 cores and it's actually hyper-threaded, so you do get 6 cores, 12 threads. It is Intel, it is 2.6 base processor, and also I found a really good deal on it, and I'm kind of cheap and didn't want to spend a whole lot of money. So there's that too. So our processor is going to be the Intel 11400F. We could have actually went with the 11600 as well. Would have gotten the same thing, but once again, deal. All right, so as far as that means we need a motherboard that is going to fit that platform. So anything that is LGA 1200 will work. I actually found a really good deal on this ROG Strix Gaming Z590 motherboard. So that's what we're going to be using today. It's a really good looking board, and I think I can make a pretty good looking build. I've got some ideas for that coming soon. But Z590 is kind of overkill for an 11400. It's not a K-SKU, so you're not going to be doing overclocking or anything like that. So if you find a good deal on it, go ahead. My experience was when looking is that the Z590 and the B560 motherboards, there's not a whole lot of difference in pricing right now, so might as well get the better board. But a B560 board would do absolutely fine. I'll link all these parts down in the description. There'll be affiliate links that help me out. So if you're interested in replicating a build like this, I'll put a couple of options down there for you. So the one good thing about this being Z590 and an 11400, so 11th gen Intel, is it does make us on a PCIe Gen 4 platform. So for storage, the most common storage configuration was actually above 1 terabyte with about 200 to 300 gigs of free space. Because I'm cheap and storage isn't going to matter for performance, I went ahead and just picked up this PNY 1 terabyte NVMe drive. It is PCIe Gen 4, 3600 and 3200 read-write speed, so it's going to be plenty fast for a gaming PC, that's for sure. So we'll go ahead and get that installed as well. Now, moving on to the other thing, the most common configuration is 16 gigs of RAM. So I picked up this T-Force Delta R. Oh, I f***ed up. All right, so I messed up here. The most common configuration is 16 gigabytes, and that's what I meant to do. I actually, because this was cheap and on sale, I got a 32 gig kit of the T-Force Delta RGB RAM. It's one of my favorite kits of RAM, by the way. 32 gigs probably is not going to make much difference in performance here for what we're going to test, and we're going to be running at 1080p, spoiler alert. So I don't think it's really going to matter. Here's the deal. If you're building a brand new gaming PC, the difference between 16 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of RAM, at least for DDR4 right now, is about $20. For $20, I would go ahead and spend the extra, get the 32 gigs of RAM. Like I said, probably not going to need it in this build, but there's a difference. So when you see the performance numbers, just know it's with 32 gigs of RAM, not 16 gigs of RAM, but that's the RAM for the platform. Now, they didn't say anything about a couple of items. So obviously for cooling, they're not going to know. They're not looking in your window, right? There's nothing that tells you what's hooked up to your computer. Or at least I don't think they're looking in your windows, but I don't work for Steam, so who knows. But so I picked up the ID Cooling SE214XT. Once again, plenty for an 11400F, but it will give us a better aesthetic, especially. But the 11th gen stock cooler for an 11400 is actually not terrible if you just wanted to use that. For power, I went ahead and picked up this gold Segotep 750 watt power supply. So that's going to be plenty of power. It is fully modular. And by the way, getting fleeced on power supplies right now, very much not fun. So if we can go back to having $60 and $70 power supplies instead of $100 and $150 power supplies, I'll stop complaining. B stock is basically non-existent because I guess AVGA's decided we're getting out of every game at this point. But yeah, power supply prices is killing me. And then, of course, the last thing that's not on the Steam hardware survey is the actual case. And today I've got this RaidMax Messian X603 there. So we're going to put this in. It basically is any case that will fit your motherboard and you like will work. It's not really going to affect anything. But I had this one laying around, and as mentioned earlier in the video, I am cheap, so we're just going to use that because I have it. All right, now for what may be the most controversial part of this video, the graphics card. So according to the Steam hardware survey, and this is the July 2023, which is the latest one as of the recording of this video, the most popular graphics card is the GTX 1650. Two things with that. Number one, I have to sell this build and get my money back when we're done. And selling a PC with a 11400 and a 1650 in it is going to be near impossible. So I'm not going to do that. Second thing, if you look at the most common configuration, the VRAM on a graphics card is actually 8 gigs of VRAM. So I'm going to call an audible, not use the 1650, and I'm going to use this. The Intel Arc A750. It's basically new, so it's current generation of Intel. It has 8 gigs of VRAM, and it's actually been doing pretty well. You can see where I tested this in 1440 in my last video, and in this video, I'm going to go ahead and test it in 1080p because the most common resolution being used still is actually 1080p. So, yay. Yeah, I don't have anything else to say about that. All right, so them's the parts. Let's go ahead and get this thing put together real quick. And then from there, we'll do some testing and see how it does. By the way, if you're interested, all these parts come out to about $800-ish, just depending on what you choose for RAM and storage and what case you get and stuff like that. So around $800, you could replicate this build. And, obviously, if you want to swap parts out, it'll cost you more or it'll cost you less. But that's your choice, man. Now, if I was a better editor and videographer, that would have been an absolutely killer transition and everyone would be losing their minds right now. But since I'm not, let's just move into the benchmarks. So starting out with the Cyberpunk 2077 built-in benchmark at 1080p medium settings, we scored an average FPS of 97. Moving on to Borderlands 3 at 1080p ultra settings, and yeah, I don't know why I'm testing at ultra instead of medium or picking a setting there, but at 1080p ultra settings we had an average FPS of 69. Nice. Moving on to the Rainbow Six Siege built-in benchmark, 1080p ultra settings, and we scored an average of 161 FPS. So this machine's very capable of playing esports titles at very high refresh rates. And moving on to everybody's favorite game, Fortnite at 1080p, basically high settings, and this is the DX12 mode. We scored an average of 107 FPS, so once again, very capable of playing esports titles at high refresh rates, and a lot of headroom to actually get higher FPS if you wanted to lower some of the settings. And then finally we have Apex Legends running at 1080p medium to highest settings, and we scored an average FPS of 115. Now this is normally where I'd get back on camera and wax poetic about how well the gaming PC did, but I was too lazy to get all the camera gear set back up. So instead, I'm just going to remind you to go down into the description, check out my socials if you'd like to follow me there, maybe watch another video or 2 or 5, subscribe if you haven't, and as always guys, I appreciate you watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.